There are true crime cases that feel closed, arrests made, evidence logged, files boxed away. And then there are cases like this one where the paperwork says solved, but the questions keep breathing. Tonight, we're going deep into the case of David Parker Ray, a man investigators believe may have abducted, tortured, and killed dozens of women over several decades. Without a single confirmed murder conviction, no dramatic music cues, no exaggerated language, just what happened and what still doesn't add up. David Parker, Ray, popularly known as the Toy Box Killer, didn't stand out. Born in 1939, Ray spent much of his life drifting between small towns in New Mexico. He worked as a mechanic, a handyman, and later as a state park employee. He lived modestly. He drank heavily. He blended in easily. People who met him described him as quiet, polite, helpful, forgettable. And that forgettability became his greatest weapon. Ray eventually settled near Elephant Butte, New Mexico, in a trailer on a remote piece of land. To outsiders, it looked like a cluttered but ordinary place, a man living alone in the desert. Inside, investigators would later discover something else entirely. Behind Ray's trailer was a soundproofed semi-trailer, what investigators would later label the toy box. This was not a metaphor. Inside were restraint systems, medical equipment, recording devices, mirrors, pulleys, and straps, detailed handwritten notes, audio tapes. Everything inside was organized, labeled, tested. Ray was methodical. Authorities believe this trailer was used for prolonged psychological and physical torture. Survivors described being drugged, restrained, and subjected to hours or days of abuse, while Ray narrated what would happen next. And that narration mattered. One of the most disturbing pieces of evidence ever recovered in a criminal case was an audio cassette recorded by Ray himself. He would play it for victims after abducting them. On the tape, Ray calmly explained where they were, that escape was impossible, that resistance would be punished, that survival depended on obedience. There was no shouting, no rage, just a flat instructional tone. Investigators later said the tape wasn't designed to terrify, it was designed to break. Victims reported that the voice on the tape felt worse than anything that followed. It stripped away hope before anything physical even began. Ray didn't rely on brute force alone. He used a combination of sedatives, muscle, relaxants, dissociative drugs. Survivors later explained that the drugs caused memory gaps, confusion, hallucinations, disorientation lasting days or weeks. This is one of the most important and controversial parts of the case. Because many victims couldn't remember details clearly, investigators struggled to establish timelines, identify locations, corroborate specific act. And Ray knew this. He reportedly told victims that even if they escaped, no one would believe them. Ray did not always act alone. Two women were later tied to the case: Cindy Hendy, his longtime partner Jesse Ray Parker. His daughter prosecutors alleged that Hendy helped lure victims, restrain them, and participate in abuse. She was eventually convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to decades in prison. Ray's daughter was accused of assisting in at least one abduction. Charges were later dropped due to lack of evidence. The involvement of accomplices complicated everything. Who did what? Who knew how much? How many crimes were shared? And how many were solo? In 1999, a woman later identified as Cynthia Vigil escaped, barefoot, disoriented, drugged, terrified. She flagged down a motorist and told police she had been held captive and tortured. This time, investigators listened. When police raided Ray's property, what they found stunned even seasoned detectives. The toy box, the tapes, the notes, the equipment, the photographs, it was all real. And yet, even with all of that, proving murder would be another story. Ray claimed to have killed up to 60 women. Investigators never verified that number. Some believe he exaggerated to increase fear. Others believe the number is conservative. Here's what complicates it. Many missing persons, cases from the region, were never linked. Bodies were never found. DNA. Technology was limited at the time Ray operated across decades. The desert doesn't give up secrets easily, and Ray knew where to hide them. In 2002, before his full trial could begin, David Parker Ray suffered a fatal heart attack in jail. No murder conviction, no full testimony, no final answers. Families of missing women were left with nothing solid, just the possibility that their loved ones had crossed paths with a man who would never speak again. And that's where the case fractures. To this day, law enforcement continues to debate. Were there more accomplices? Were there burial sites never discovered? How many victims survived and never came forward? How many didn't survive at all? Some investigators believe Ray's operation was far larger than the evidence suggests. Others believe he was dangerous, but not as prolific as claimed. Both sides agree on one thing: the full story died with him. Or did it? Most serial killer cases end with confession, evidence, closure. This one ended with silence. Boxes of tapes were sealed. Some evidence remains restricted. Certain names were never released. And former investigators have hinted, carefully, that there are elements of the case the public still hasn't seen. This is the part of the story most summaries rush past, not the rumors, not the numbers whispered online, the evidence, what investigators actually found, documented, photographed, logged, sealed, and argued over. Because when police finally stepped into David Parker Ray's world, they didn't just uncover a crime scene, they uncovered a system. After Cynthia Vigil escaped in March 1999, deputies didn't treat the report as a misunderstanding. Her condition made that impossible. She was disoriented, bruised, drugged, terrified. Able to describe specific objects, restraints, and locations. Most importantly, she could point to a place. When law enforcement obtained a warrant and entered the property near Elephant Butte, New Mexico, they expected something bad. They did not expect how complete it was. Investigators found a soundproof trailer hidden behind Ray's main residence. Inside were items that, on their own, might be explainable. Together, they were not. The evidence log included surgical-style restraints bolted into walls and furniture, pulleys mounted to the ceiling, medical tools not associated with any licensed practice, veterinary medications, detailed handwritten instructions, multiple mirrors positioned for observation, cameras and recording equipment, audio cassettes labeled and dated. This wasn't chaotic violence. This was repeatable. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. Everything suggested practice. The most disturbing evidence wasn't physical, it was instructional. Detectives recovered audio recordings made by Ray himself, calm, rehearsed, and deliberate. These tapes were not rage-fueled rants. They were scripts. Ray explained the rules, the punishments, the expectations, the illusion of choice. Investigators described the recordings as procedural, the way a pilot might explain emergency steps. This detail mattered legally because it proved premeditation, not impulse, not loss of control. Planning. Ray kept notebooks, not diaries, not confessions, manuals. They included lists of preferred restraints, drug dosages and combinations, notes on victim reactions, adjustments for resistance or compliance observations on memory loss, effectiveness. Some pages were crossed out, others were rewritten. This suggested experimentation. The notebooks told investigators something critical. Ray was refining a method. Toxicology reports and recovered substances showed Ray relied heavily on chemical control. These substances caused short-term paralysis, dissociation, amnesia, confusion lasting days or weeks. From an investigative standpoint, this was devastating. Victims could recall fragments, recognize voices, identify sensations, but they struggled with dates, locations, sequences. Defense attorneys would later argue, if memory is unreliable, testimony is unreliable. Ray had engineered plausible deniability into his crimes. Two names emerged repeatedly in the files. Cindy Hendy evidence showed Hendy helped lure victims, assisted in restraints, participated in abuse, threatened victims afterward, phone records, witness statements, physical presence. She would later be convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 36 years. Jessie Ray, Parker Ray's daughter, was implicated in at least one abduction. However, evidence was largely testimonial. No physical proof tied her to the toy box. Charges were eventually dropped. The lack of resolution here remains one of the case's most controversial aspects. This is where the case fractures. Ray was charged with kidnapping and torture, not murder. Why? Because no bodies were recovered. No confirmed DNA links to deceased victims existed. Many missing persons. Cases lacked direct evidence. Ray claimed he killed dozens. Investigators never verified this. Some detectives believed, Bodies were disposed of in remote desert locations. Remains were scattered or destroyed. Time erased physical proof. Others believed Ray exaggerated. The truth sits somewhere between. But the absence of bodies did not mean absence of death. It meant absence of proof. Federal agencies were consulted. Evidence was reviewed by behavioral analysts, forensic psychologists, cold case specialists. The consensus was chilling. Ray displayed traits of long-term serial offenders who operate below detection thresholds by targeting marginalized victims, using isolation, employing psychological domination, avoiding patterns that attract attention. In other words, he didn't hunt loudly, he hunted quietly. As prosecutors prepared their case, they believed they could secure multiple life sentences, possibly federal charges, expanded investigations into missing persons. Then, in 2002, before the trial concluded, Ray died of a heart attack in custody. No confession, no testimony, no cross-examination. With his death, active investigation stalled. Potential burial site leads went cold. Families lost their chance to hear answers. The system closed the file, but the question stayed open. After decades of preparation, after careful control, after near total anonymity, David Parker, Ray was caught because one victim refused to disappear. Cynthia Vigil escaped, not because the system failed him, not because law enforcement was watching, not because technology advanced, but because for one moment his control slipped. She ran. She flagged down help. She spoke. And that single act collapsed an operation built over decades. Ray is dead. Hendy is imprisoned. The toy box is gone. But investigators still quietly admit some evidence remains sealed, some tapes have never been released, some missing women were never accounted for, and perhaps the darkest truth of all. If Cynthia Vigil hadn't escaped that night, David Parker Ray might never have been caught at all.